Our long-awaited 2025 race weekend at Australia is finally here. We get our first look at the cars outside of Bahrain and some interesting new specs to each of these cars. It's going to be a very interesting weekend. At some point, it's going to be blistering hot. And on race day, it's a 90% chance now, sometimes even hitting 100 depending on where you're looking at, that rain will fall. So we're going to see some extremes here when it comes to rear wing setups and cooling. And the compromise that teams are going to have to make here for Albert Park will be very interesting to see what they end up going with for qualifying and the race. But we can go over what we've seen in the paddock as of right now and the new specs to the cars. If you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe. It would mean the world. Got a goal of 100K. It would mean a lot if you guys could help me out there. And there's plenty more to cover in the season. It's only the start. This is just Australia. But let's get into our rear wings for the 2025 start of the season. There was also a pretty good comparison from Formula Paddock on X showing the rear wing designs from Bahrain. So this could be really our median of what we'll probably see throughout the season, as these are the step 3 out of 5 in downforce, or medium downforce, however you'd like to call it, for all these cars. So it's a good middle ground of comparing when we get new rear wings like we've gotten so far here in Australia. Looking at our first 4 teams, we do have the McLaren team, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. And this is typically the top 4 that we've gotten through the last year. I expect the same this year as well. And there are a couple of different solutions. McLaren, they're still rocking that middle dip on their lower plane. This is a lower downforce rear wing. I'm going to also tell you guys about the categories because really there's like 5 different categories each rear wing can be. You got low, medium high, and high downforce in general. Low being Monza, and then Monaco being really your number 5. Now this wing, it's about a 2. It's pretty close to a 3. It's not as extreme as another rear wing out of the top 4, but it's still a step down in downforce, making it a medium low. And as I said, we're in that last season of regulations. So really, teams are relying a lot on the downforce of the floor. I don't think this is going to be necessarily the wing they run for the rest of the weekend, as with rain predicted, the more downforce, the better. And DRS efficiency is also important here, which is why Ferrari is running a step 3, which is medium downforce. It's the exact same rear wing they had in Bahrain. They're running it here. They did the exact same last year, actually, in 2024 in Australia. Had a very good start to the season. They were the most aero efficient car coming into Australia. Now, McLaren did have its problems at its time. It was still pretty draggy. The Ferrari has always been a pretty efficient car and quick on the straights, which is not something the McLaren, the orange car, has had. So they've always had that going for them. They love that medium downforce rear wing, as it's been so helpful on so many tracks. And it's really given them that rear stability they tend to lack from track to track. So they are a step up, but the Red Bull seems to have had the most low downforce rear wing. It's still a number 2 in that medium low, but as you can see with the lower plane, they're trying to shred as much drag as possible and really putting the floor to work, which has been very common for the Red Bull team. I don't expect anything less. And finally, they're bringing different rear wings to each GP, as last year they pretty much only had a 1, a 3, and a 5, so low, medium, and high. But now they actually have a number 2 because they realize they're not that ahead. They got to be bringing every little part they can, and there's no room for error really in this 2025 season. Mercedes as well was another team, just like Ferrari, stuck with the number 3, the medium downforce, for pretty much the whole season, depending on certain tracks. Obviously, they would change it. Now, this is a number 2. It is different to that what they ran in Bahrain. Every team here, with the exception of Ferrari, is running a different rear wing, and really that's just in the downforce levels. As you can see, in the lower plane, that scoop, it's not as big as what we saw in Bahrain with a comparison of those two. And I do believe this is a very strong car on the front end. I have my doubts about how it could run here with really hot conditions in qualifying, but you never really know. It's hard to count out any of these teams for a victory. And of course, Lando Norris is spewing a lot, saying that the Ferrari was pretty quick in testing, just didn't show it off, but we'll really have to see. Let's go over another 4 teams. The next 4 teams is Aston Martin, Alpine, Haas, and Williams, and this is probably going to be our midfield for the season. Maybe Racing Bulls makes its way up. It would be a shock for me if Sauber makes it there. And yet again, different solutions for the 4 different teams. Aston Martin is rocking what looks to be the exact same rear wing from that of Bahrain. So this is a number 3, as that lower plane is still pretty bulky. It's not shredding too much drag. They're trying to go for the DRS efficiency, as there's 4 DRS zones here. So it does play a big factor. And I do think these teams are going to take a step back when the rain comes, because as I said, downforce is going to play more of an importance with the rain when the teams really need it for cornering speed. Now the Alpine, that is a pretty extreme category 2 rear wing. It's very, very low drag, and we've seen this commonly with them. Their engine is typically a step down to everybody else, so they have to run a wing with less drag to gain more speed on the straights to actually try and make a more aero efficient package. And it does seem like they have the most extreme out of all the teams so far when it comes to having the lowest amount of downforce. I do think Haas is also running a category 2, but as you can see with category 2, there's an extreme there. Alpine is pretty close to that of a category 1, but still just enough with the upper and lower plane. It's going to be at a medium low, but both here are medium low. And I do think that Williams is also running a medium low downforce rear wing. This has been pretty common with them as well. They like a little bit less downforce. They've been relying more on the car's slippy nature, and that's why they've always been fast in a straight no matter what track you really put them on. So that's what we have for the 8 teams. We didn't really get too many good images. Albert Fabrega obviously putting out the best images and collecting them together. Goated as always. But let's talk about what we've gotten for the rest of the cars here in Australia. Looking at a couple of front wings, Red Bull, yes, they've brought back that package that they used in Bahrain, that front wing setup where the nose is disconnected from the bottom plane where they typically had it in 2024. And it's very hard to notice here, but the team will be running the floor spec that they ran in Bahrain that they tested and did not really like, to see if they can find better correlation overall for the car, and if they can make it work, a setup window, because that's of course the most important thing. And it seems like they still have a lot more faith in that part of the car. There's small adjustments. It's really in the underfloor. Yes, this is a nice image. It also shows you the cooling. This will be a big factor for a lot of teams. We will continue to talk about that because we're going to go from an extreme to rain. So the amount of cooling gills you open up could play a big factor in your straight line speed and overall drag on the car. Sauber, as I said, is bringing 20% of their car. This is a new front wing, but we haven't seen really the rest of the car. You can see in the background, they're still running those weird slide pods. And this is going to be a front-oriented track for most of these cars. I do expect them to be a step up from that of Bahrain, but the car was very tricky under plenty of different conditions, so I'm not expecting much, but maybe they can still be in the hunt for being like a P8 or P9 here in Australia. Really depends on the conditions. Another really interesting picture that we've gotten is the actual brakes for the McLaren. And yes, these are not parts that matter too much when it comes to aero, but they were hiding this a lot in testing. And there were a lot of rumors last year suggesting that McLaren was cheating somewhere in that brake system. But those investigations came to prove that that wasn't the case. And these are always really nice and slick images to look at the car. You can actually see part of the floor as well, even the side pod inlet, and really that extreme anti-dive. And speaking of that, the actual Ferrari car itself does not have a lot of anti-dive on it. It was something they tested in the wind tunnel, which is something that we now know, and found that this solution, in comparison to the anti-dive solution, there wasn't too much of a difference. So they ended up resorting to this. Setup is going to be a big part here for them to actually figure out. And as I stated, Lando Norris is saying the car is much quicker. They knew the fuel loads on the Ferrari, and they expect them to be much better here than shown in testing. So I guess it's a good sign for Lewis Hamilton and Charles fans, but no promises. It's not like Lando is an expert here to really know what each team is doing. There was also an interesting graph that came out today showing the predicted race paces from the F1 broadcast, and they're saying that Ferrari is 4th. I don't believe this, but yet again, we really won't know until practice 2, which I will make a video on that, don't you worry. Looking at also the green car, they brought a front wing that they used in testing, but there were 2 different iterations. One had more jagged edges. This one is a bit more simplified, closer to that of the 2024 front wing. And they're probably going to change between the 2. It is still important for teams to find that setup window. That is the key here for the balance. And looking at this beautiful shot from the back, we don't have those weird black colored cooling gills. It's actually now part of the car. And of course, it's opened up to the max. With any team right now, Aston Martin, you're going to see it on the Mercedes in a little bit. Most of them are opened up fully till they know how much they can take away go race day. And they're going to try and deplete it as small as possible, but it's going to be very tough in these hot conditions. We also got a great shot of the diffuser, and the solution looks very similar to that of the RB20 after Baku, where they pretty much closed up that last step in the diffuser, making it 1. And I do feel like this is where Aston has lacked the most, and the diffuser and really the underfloor of the car. They haven't been able to extract the possible downforce without having weaknesses in the season like porpoising or other problems really added on throughout the year. There's also a really great shot of the McLaren's floor to look at here. As you can see, that first Venturi tunnel is much more cut out than that of last year. And just a sick shot of this car from the bottom, showing you the extremes they've really gone for in the suspension, in the floor, and even the side pod inlets. It's a car that's taken every piece of its aerodynamic surface and put it to the extreme for 2025. I wonder how much more they can develop upon this. They've stated that they still can. And it'll be really interesting to see if they really are the favorites and if their pace is really that strong here in Australia. As you can also see on the Mercedes car, take a look at that cooling, opened up completely. Will it be like that by the end of the GP weekend? We'll have to find out. But it also gives you a good shot of the rear wing, that new rear wing installed on the car, which wasn't very common for Mercedes in 2024. But that's all we got for Australia. Really, updates on the cars, they're not too huge as I expected. Small, not really even upgrades, they're just track specific, which will be a common thing we see in 2025. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.